September 1944. The war in Europe was turning against Germany. Cities lay in ruins from Allied bombing campaigns, armies retreated on multiple fronts, and tens of thousands of German soldiers were being captured each month. Among the prisoners of war transported across the Atlantic to camps in the United States were a smaller, often overlooked group, German women. They had served in auxiliary roles as clerks, Red Cross nurses, communication operators, and medical assistants. Indoctrinated from youth in Nazi ideology, many believed capture by Americans would mean humiliation, brutality, and perhaps even death. For 20-year-old Anna Müller, a nurse from Bremen, the crossing itself was filled with dread. She huddled with dozens of other women in the belly of a Liberty ship, staring at the horizon through the tiny portholes. American guards were polite but distant, offering food and water at regular intervals. Yet Anna refused to eat more than a few bites. "Better to starve than accept food from them," she whispered to her friend Lotta. But by the fifth day, hunger gnawed at her, and she accepted the thick slice of bread and buttered potatoes placed in her tin tray. It tasted richer than any meal she had known during the long rationing years in Germany. Upon arrival in Norfolk, Virginia, the women braced for what they thought would be public humiliation. Nazi propaganda had warned them. The Americans parade their captives through the streets, mocking them before they are worked to death. Yet instead, they were quickly processed, given medical examinations, and loaded onto trains bound for the interior of the country. "It was almost orderly," one woman later recorded in her diary. "Too civilized for the barbarians we were told about." The journey itself provided the first shock. As the train rolled through American farmland, the women pressed their faces against the Gitau, Lass. They saw endless fields of corn and wheat, massive tractors moving across the land, and small towns with brightly lit houses. There were no signs of shortages, no bombed-out ruins, no hungry children scavenging for food. Lotta whispered, almost in disbelief, "They told us America was starving. But look, every shop window is full. The children are fat. It cannot be true." When they arrived at a POW camp in the Midwest, rows of barracks surrounded by barbed wire, their fears returned. The gates clanged shut behind them, and the sight of watchtowers confirmed their new reality. Yet as they were issued fresh uniforms, new boots and mattresses with clean sheets, the mood shifted again. "I did not sleep on such a bed since before the war," Anna admitted quietly that night, ashamed to feel relief inside enemy captivity. It was the next morning, however, that the women encountered something truly bewildering. After roll call, one of the guards pointed toward a small wooden building near the center of the camp. Above the doorway stood a plain wooden cross. The guard explained through an interpreter, "Tomorrow is Sunday. There will be church services. Attendance is voluntary. Prisoners are welcome." The women exchanged stunned glances. In their minds, Americans were supposed to be godless materialists, crude and without culture. Yet here, in the middle of a prisoner of war camp, stood a chapel. And not just for Americans, but for them as well. "This must be a trick," whispered Gerda, another nurse. "They will make us pray to humiliate us." The following Sunday, curiosity overcame fear. A small group of German women walked hesitantly toward the chapel, watched by guards who neither mocked nor hurried them. Inside, they found simple wooden pews, hymnals placed neatly along the benches, and an American chaplain waiting at the front. To their amazement, the service began, with a hymn they recognized, "Silent Night." The tune was the same, though the words were English. Anna felt her chest tighten as she realized she could join in, softly mouthing the German lyrics while Americans sang in their language. For the first time since capture, she felt something familiar, almost comforting. After the service, the chaplain approached them. "You are welcome here," he said gently through the interpreter. "We pray not as enemies, but as fellow children of God." The words struck the women like thunder. They had expected curses or condemnation. Instead, they were being addressed as sisters in faith. Back in their barracks, debate erupted. Some insisted it was propaganda, a trick meant to weaken their loyalty. Others, like Anna, could not shake the memory of that hymn. "I sang," she whispered. "For a moment I forgot we were prisoners." The shock of the chapel lingered through the week. When Sunday returned, more women attended, this time filling nearly half the pews. The chaplain greeted them again with warmth and even invited them to choose a hymn in German. Hesitantly, one of the women suggested Ave Maria. To their astonishment, the Americans agreed, and soon voices in both languages rose together under the wooden rafters. For the German women, this was more destabilizing than any abundance of food or clean sheets. Propaganda could not explain away a shared hymn. How could enemies, who were supposedly ruthless and barbaric, sing their songs, pray to their God, and treat them not as captives, but as fellow believers? One diary entry from that autumn captured the confusion perfectly. "We were told America is without spirit, only machines and material wealth. But here in captivity I found faith again. They prayed with us, not against us." By the end of October 1944, the camp's chapel had become a place of quiet transformation. Not all the German women attended, and some remained defiant, refusing to bend to what they called enemy tricks. Yet, for many others, the experience sowed the first seeds of doubt about everything they had been taught. If America was supposed to be godless, why did its chaplains treat them with respect? If Americans were monsters, why did they welcome them to pray? The stage was set for the deeper transformations that would follow, moments when faith, compassion, and humanity would break through walls of propaganda and reshape lives forever. By November 1944, the war in Europe had entered its darkest phase for Germany. Reports trickled into the camps, Allied armies advancing on the Western Front, Soviet forces pushing from the east. For the women behind the barbed wire of the American camp, the news meant only one thing: their homeland was crumbling. Yet inside the wire, life followed a routine that grew increasingly surreal to them. Roll calls, work assignments, meals in the mess hall, all conducted with efficiency but little cruelty. The shock of attending Sunday services still echoed in their conversations. Some women clung stubbornly to Nazi indoctrination. "It is a trick. They sing our songs only to weaken us." But others, like Anna Müller, couldn't ignore the peace she felt each time she entered the chapel. As Advent approached, the chaplain announced that a Christmas service would be held, and all prisoners were welcome. The Americans, he explained, were preparing something special: carols, candles, and even a shared feast. The German women whispered furiously in their barracks that night. Was this possible? Back home, their families faced bombing raids, hunger, and fear. Yet here, in captivity, the enemy was offering them Christmas? On the evening of December 24th, 1944, snow dusted the ground outside the camp. The chapel glowed with lantern light, its windows frosted but warm from within. When the German women stepped through the door, they froze in astonishment. The interior had been decorated with garlands of pine, paper stars, and candles flickering along the windowsills. At the front stood not just the American chaplain, but also a small choir of US soldiers, ready to sing. The service began with English hymns, but soon the chaplain raised his hand. "Tonight," he said through the interpreter, "we will also sing in German." He nodded to the prisoners. "Please, lead us." There was a stunned silence. Then, hesitantly, one German nurse began, "Stille Nacht, heilige Nacht." Her voice trembled at first, but soon others joined in. To their shock, the Americans followed along in English, their voices blending into a haunting harmony. The sound filled the wooden chapel, rising into the rafters, until German and American voices were indistinguishable in the shared hymn. Tears streamed down Anna's face. She had sung Silent Night every Christmas of her life, but never had it carried such weight. Here she was, a prisoner, standing beside her enemies, and yet in that moment they were united in faith. After the service, the Germans were invited to the mess hall. To their disbelief, the long wooden tables were covered with roasted turkey, ham, bread, butter, and pies. Red Cross parcels were distributed, each containing luxuries almost forgotten in Germany: chocolate, coffee, even cigarettes. The women stared in silence, their emotions a tangle of gratitude, shame, and disbelief. Gerda, usually defiant, whispered, "How can it be that we, prisoners, eat like this, while our families at home starve?" The words hung heavy in the air. One American guard, noticing their hesitation, said gently, "This meal is not to mock you. It is Christmas. Tonight we are not enemies, only people." The German women ate slowly, almost guiltily, as if betraying their homeland by enjoying the feast. Yet they could not deny the warmth that spread through them, not just from the food, but from the realization that their captors recognized their humanity. Later that night, Anna sat in her barrack, writing by lantern light. Her diary entry captured the emotional shock. "We were prepared to be hated. Instead, they shared their holy night with us. The enemy sang our carols, broke bread with us, and treated us as if we were their own. I do not know what to believe anymore." The Christmas service became a turning point. Women who had sworn never to step inside the American chapel now reconsidered. The idea that their faith could be shared, not mocked or manipulated, was something no propaganda had prepared them for. Over the following weeks, attendance at Sunday services grew. The chaplain preached sermons about forgiveness and reconciliation, messages that pierced deeper than he could have known. Some German women bristled, refusing to abandon their loyalty to the Reich, but others found themselves moved in ways they could not explain. Lotta confided to Anna, "If these Americans can sing our songs and feed us on Christmas, how can they be the monsters we were told they are?" By January 1945, the ideological cracks were widening. The women had seen with their own eyes that America was not starving, not godless, not cruel. It was, in many ways, the opposite of what they had been taught. And the simple act of being invited to worship alongside their enemies had done more to break propaganda than any battlefield defeat. The shock of Christmas would stay with them for the rest of their captivity, and for many, for the rest of their lives. The new year of 1945 arrived with biting cold winds across the American Midwest. Snow blanketed the rows of barracks inside the prisoner of war camp, and yet the German women found themselves strangely restless. Christmas had been both a blessing and a torment. The warmth of shared faith had soothed their spirits, but the memory of their families starving back home gnawed at their conscience. "How can we sing when our mothers shiver in ruins?" Anna wrote in her diary one January evening. Still, the rhythms of captivity pressed on. Roll calls, work duties, occasional Red Cross parcels, and above all, the Sunday gatherings in the camp chapel. By February, the chapel was filled not only with German women, but also with Italian, and even a handful of Japanese prisoners. What had begun as an American service with a few curious Germans had grown into something resembling a community of faith across enemy lines. The chaplain, a soft-spoken man named Captain William Harris, noticed the change. Instead of standing stiff and suspicious, the women now sat attentively. Instead of leaving quickly after the benediction, they lingered, sometimes asking questions through the interpreter. "What did it mean," one woman asked, "that Americans prayed for their enemies as well as their soldiers?" Another asked why the chaplain spoke of forgiveness when surely Americans hated them. Harris's answers were simple but radical. Because hatred ends wars, but forgiveness prevents them from beginning again. The true test came in the spring. Easter Sunday 1945 fell on April the 1st. In the weeks leading up to it, rumors circulated through the camp that the Americans were preparing another special service. The German women whispered about it at night, curiosity clashing with suspicion. "They will use Easter to mock us," Gerda muttered. But Anna shook her head. Christmas was no trick. It was real. Perhaps this will be too. On Easter morning, the chapel bell rang early. Prisoners of every nationality filed in, and the German women gasped when they saw the decorations. White lilies lined the altar, sunlight streamed through freshly polished windows, and at the centre stood a wooden cross draped with a white cloth. A choir of American soldiers stood ready, but this time the chaplain announced they would not sing alone. He had asked the German women to prepare a hymn in their own language. Hesitantly, Anna and two others stepped forward. Their voices began with Christ ist erstanden, an old German hymn, trembling at first, but then swelling as others joined. The Americans responded with Christ the Lord is risen today. Verse after verse, the two languages wove together, not competing but echoing one another in harmony. For many of the German women it was unbearable. Tears streamed freely as the sound filled the chapel. How can enemies proclaim the same resurrection? One wrote later. We had been told that God was only with Germany, but here in America I saw that he was larger than nations. After the service came another shock. A guest preacher had been invited, a black chaplain from a nearby US Army unit. The German women stiffened instantly. Nazi ideology had drilled into them since childhood that black people were inferior, uncivilized, unworthy of respect. And yet here stood an American officer in uniform, speaking from the pulpit with authority and reverence. His sermon, delivered with quiet strength, spoke of liberation not just from nations, but from hatred. Through the interpreter he told them, "When we pray, we do not ask God the color of those who kneel beside us. We ask only that he hears us." The silence afterward was heavy. Some of the German women refused to meet his gaze, but others, Anna included, felt their world shift again. She could not deny the dignity with which he carried himself, the respect with which the American soldiers listened. "If he is respected here," she wrote later, "then what we were taught in Germany was a lie." The weeks following Easter were filled with restless conversations. Some women clung bitterly to the old teachings. "The Americans are corrupting us," Gerda hissed one night. "They want us to forget who we are." But even she could not explain away what they had seen. The singing, the lilies, the black chaplain preaching to both guards and prisoners as equals. By May, whispers of Germany's surrender reached the camp. Radios crackled with news, guards spoke in hushed tones, and the women's hearts sank. Defeat was no longer a possibility. It was imminent. One evening, Anna overheard two American guards discussing the fall of Berlin. She pressed her ear to the wooden wall, heart pounding. The Reich she had been taught would last 1,000 years had collapsed in less than 12. When the official announcement came in early May, the camp fell into eerie silence. Some prisoners wept openly, others sat in stunned disbelief. The German women gathered in their barrack, the reality settling over them like a weight too heavy to bear. They were no longer soldiers or auxiliaries of a mighty nation. They were the citizens of a defeated, ruined country. That Sunday, the chaplain addressed them directly. "Your war is over," he said gently, "but your lives are not. Faith remains, compassion remains, and you too remain." His words offered no false comfort, yet they carried a truth the women could not deny. Anna's diary from that week captured the moment. "We sang Easter hymns with our enemies. We saw a black chaplain preach with authority, but we learned that the Reich has fallen. Everything we believed is crumbling. But perhaps from these ruins something better can grow." The Easter service, coming just weeks before Germany's surrender, marked the final collapse of the ideological walls many of these women had carried into captivity. They had arrived expecting humiliation and death. Instead, they found hymns, candles, and sermons about forgiveness. By May 1945, they were no longer just prisoners of war. They were witnesses to a different way of life, one where faith was larger than propaganda and compassion stronger than hate. Summer 1945. The war in Europe was finished. The news of Hitler's death, the collapse of Berlin, and unconditional surrender had swept across the globe. Inside the American POW camps, the German women processed it with a mix of grief, shame, and something more complex: relief. Relief that the bombing, the hunger, the endless sacrifices demanded by their leaders might finally be over. For Anna Müller and her companions, the camp no longer felt like a prison. Yes, barbed wire still encircled them, and guards still patrolled the towers. But within the perimeter, their lives had taken on a strange rhythm of stability. Meals were regular, medical care available, and the chapel remained a central fixture of their days. What had begun with suspicious curiosity had turned into weekly routine, and by the summer, most of the German women could be found in the pews every Sunday. The chaplain, Captain William Harris, continued his gentle ministry. He never spoke of politics. He never gloated about Germany's defeat. Instead, he spoke of reconciliation, of building a new life after destruction, of faith that could transcend nations. For the women whose worldviews had been shattered, these sermons were both comforting and disorienting. One Sunday in June, Harris addressed them directly. "You will soon go home. You will return to families who have suffered, to cities in ruins, to a nation searching for meaning. You must decide what to carry back with you, the hatred that brought you here, or the faith that sustained you here." The words struck Anna like a hammer. That night she lay awake, staring at the wooden ceiling of the barrack. What would she carry home? The Reich had demanded loyalty, obedience, hatred of the other. Yet here, behind barbed wire, she had been shown mercy, fed when her own people starved, and invited into worship when she had expected mockery. By July, rations for repatriation began. Groups of women were assembled, given medical checkups, and issued travel papers. The camp buzzed with nervous energy. Some women wept at the thought of returning to their families. Others dreaded facing the ruins they knew awaited them. The last Sunday before departure was unlike any other. The chapel was overflowing. Germans packed shoulder to shoulder with Italians, even a few Japanese prisoners. The choir sang hymns in multiple languages. At the close, Chaplain Harris did something unforgettable. He invited the German women to step forward. "You came here as enemies," he said softly, his voice carrying through the wooden rafters. "But today you leave as witnesses. Not witnesses to America's power, but to God's mercy. Wherever you go, carry the memory that even in war, compassion can live." For Anna, it was too much. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched her hymn book. She had thought herself hardened, but now she realized she was being given something more valuable than rations or Red Cross parcels: the responsibility of remembering. The journey home was long. Transport ships carried them back across the Atlantic, not as auxiliaries of a mighty Reich, but as citizens of a defeated nation. On the decks, the women whispered among themselves. What would they find? Families gone? Cities leveled? How could they explain what they had seen? American guards treating them with respect, chaplains inviting them to worship, black preachers proclaiming truth with dignity. When their ship docked in Bremerhaven in late 1945, the answer struck them like a physical blow. Their homeland was unrecognizable. Bombed-out ruins stretched across the harbor. Children with hollow eyes begged for scraps. Buildings stood as hollow shells, their windows gaping like wounds. Anna searched desperately for her family and finally found her mother living in a crowded cellar with two neighbors. Thin as a shadow, her mother embraced her and whispered through tears, "We feared you would be beaten, starved, maybe killed. Thank God you are alive." How could Anna explain that she had eaten more as a prisoner than her mother had as a free civilian? That she had slept on a bed with sheets, sung hymns with Americans, and been addressed as a colleague by US doctors? The words stuck in her throat. It felt like betrayal to admit the truth, yet silence felt like a lie. Over the following weeks, as Anna walked the ruins of Bremen, she began to understand the chaplain's charge. Everywhere she went, people spoke with bitterness. "The Americans destroyed us," they muttered. "They humiliated us." Yet Anna knew that was only part of the truth. The bombs had destroyed cities, yes, but the Americans she had met behind barbed wire had not mocked or humiliated her. They had shared hymns, meals, and even forgiveness. Slowly, she began to share pieces of her story. At first, people recoiled. "Impossible," they snapped. "The Americans are barbarians." But Anna persisted. She told them about Christmas carols sung together, about the Easter lilies in the camp chapel, about the chaplain who had reminded them that faith was larger than nations. Not everyone believed her, but some listened, and for them, her story planted seeds of doubt in the old propaganda. In 1946, Anna found work at a small clinic helping malnourished children. She carried with her a worn hymn book given to her by Captain Harris on the day of her departure. On its inside cover, he had written, "Faith without hatred is stronger than armies. Carry it home." Each Sunday, she joined a small congregation in the ruins of a bombed-out church, the roof gone, the walls charred, but voices rising nonetheless. When she sang Silent Night that Christmas, she remembered the wooden chapel in America, the blending of German and English voices, and she knew she would never forget. For the rest of her life, Anna carried that memory, the shock of being invited as a prisoner and my into an American church. It was not the abundance of food, nor even the medical care that had broken her worldview. It was the realization that the enemy had prayed beside her, not against her. Years later, when she told her grandchildren the story, she summarized it simply. "They captured us, yes, but then they did the unthinkable. They called us sisters in faith.